This is the 99th episode of the Effective Executive Podcast and YouTube channel. And this week I decided to leverage a video that I did for my Brains and Bulls channel. Now, occasionally things overlap. It's like Venn diagrams, but I decided that this week that it really did overlap quite a bit into not only understanding what's happening in our economy right now, but also it applied to the whole message around the effective executive. And so I am going to just let this thing run, and I hope you enjoy it. Hopefully this hits home with people and they understand how the Federal Reserve tampers with the economy. I wanted to do a video on the Federal Reserve and how they really are tampering with the economy. So much of my career has been working with organizations with 150 employees plus, and even, you know, much larger, typically, organizations. And one of the things that you get when you have more employees, you get more complexity. And the cure for, as most large organizations believe, that the cure for complexity is control. And it's not, you know, and this is something that organizations grasp onto. And when you get into government, you can just exponentially multiply um, you know, the complexity of that particular organization, and especially the U.S. government or any government the size of the U.S. And so when you get in the economy, uh, both sides, and when I say both sides, you know, Democrats mostly associate with being Keynesian economists, and supply side economists are associated with the Republicans, and both believe that you have to have government doing something. And I think that that's the problem. Is every time something goes wrong in the U.S., whether it's, you know, a shooting or whatever, you know, we got to do something with the either the Second Amendment, or we've got to do something with the assault rifles or whatever. And so somebody has to do something. And and the funny comments that you get from people out there about doing something rarely is the right thing. And it almost Dan Kamen's book, you know, Moving Fast and Slow. You know, your brain hits something. It's very emotional when somebody is killed or hurt or whatever, and so the emotional part of your innate mindset is, you know, we have to do something. And typically you find out that the better thing to do is let time pass and get the emotion out of things. And so you get the same thing with the economy, right? A lot of it is driven by, you know, behavioral types of aspects. What's the psychological makeup of what's happening in the market? And so both Republicans and Democrats both love government control because the government can do something. Now, it didn't always used to be that way, but it's gotten more that way. And someone who is a more come from the Austrian School of Economics, the control, and also from my consulting practice, I've learned that the more control you have, the more possibility there is to make things worse. And I'll get into that in just a minute. But one of the things that happened, if we look at the Federal Reserve back, you know, there was bank panics that started in 1907. There was instability in banks, and so you have this uproar of somebody do something. And so the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 as somebody to do something. And great book is The Creature from Jekyll Island, which I'll put a link to. You can purchase it from Amazon. If you use my link, I get a small marketing commission from Amazon for if you use that link. So I always try to be upfront about those types of things. But the Creature from Jekyll Island is about the Federal Reserve and explains why the Fed creates booms and busts and inflation too, and how it destabilizes our economy. So I strongly suggest, if you're interested in these types of things, that getting The Creature from Jekyll Island is well worth a read. And you will probably be joining George Gammon and the Fed and some of his hats that he has. But regardless, as I went through my consulting career, it was devoted to unwinding control in large bureaucratic organizations. The thesis or the theory associated with control being needed in large organizations, I've just found is not true, but it does take a completely different mindset than most organizations have. And that's why they hire me, is in order to help them get through these psychological barriers, because your belief systems are challenged when somebody says, well, control is exactly the opposite thing of what you should be doing. So you can learn more about that at The Effective Executive. I have a YouTube channel on here also, so I'm not going to get too much further into that. But when I work with organizations, first things I look at not only are the purpose, but the first two things I'm primarily focused in on are things being tampered with in the organization. Get an assessment of that. Are they using limited or wrong data? Oftentimes it's wrong data. Most of the organizations, especially the larger they get, they look at what I call results data in companies. And these results data are things associated typically with financials or some end of something. And it's basically driving your car looking through the rear view mirror. And it's a horrible way to manage. And the larger the organization is, the more they seem to manage off of these rear view looking data. So that's the first thing. You're going to tamper with your system, with your organization, with the economy in this case, talking about the Federal Reserve, if you're looking through the rear view mirror. So that's the first thing, wrong or limited data. The second thing are common and special causes. Now, these terms come from originally from Walter Shewhart, who invented statistical process control charts for making, actually, they wound up helping us win the war in World War II, but were made famous by W. Edwards Deming. And what you wind up with, and if you just kind of look here, I'm not going to explain that. I'll put a link to some other resources around statistical process control. But if you look at this chart, when you look at this chart, what you see is common cause variation between those limits of 763 and 506. And again, for this exercise, it doesn't matter what the data are. Anything between those limits is 3 standard deviation limits, plus or minus, is considered common cause variation. Now, when you get a point outside of the limit, now you have something that you need to react to. But what I believe is going on, and I don't see the data that that the Fed is using, is that they're treating these points within the blue box, the common cause variation, as if it's special. And so they become very reactionary, tampering with the system. And that, from a data standpoint, is the operational definition of tampering, is either treating a special cause as a common cause or a common cause as a special cause. So what I see more often are points within the limits, common cause variation, treated as a special cause, which is the most common type of tampering that I see not only in organizations, but what I believe is happening with the Fed. Now, further, there are multiple ways of identifying special causes. One is outside of a limit, either above or below the limit. And there's also what I like to call the boiling frog, which is, if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, it's going to jump out because its skin feels it. But if you slowly turn up the heat, it'll boil just sitting in there. And that is when you have slow deterioration of something, in this case, got points going down. And they treat this as common cause variation when there's something going on in your system. And I would seriously doubt that the Federal Reserve uses statistical process control charts to know, what's going on. They are reacting. And when you react without knowledge, first of all, of having the limited or wrong data, then you're going to make things worse. And if you're treating common causes as a special cause or special cause as common cause, you're tampering with your system and making it worse. And so the Fed suffers from both of these things because they have limited and wrong data, because they're using lagging indicators. They're using things like CPI and CPE and unemployment, all things that lag the economy. They're not leading. They are the results data that I talk with executives about when they're looking at their system. Oh, I manage by these financials. Well, the financials are the end result. There are things happening in your system that you need to identify in order to change those results. And so that is, in essence, the concept of tampering with things because you're looking at the wrong data. You're making things worse. Then there's the second component of this is, because I'm 99% sure the Federal Reserve doesn't chart its data in the way that I'm identifying here, is they treat common causes as special causes and special causes as common causes. And what you have is really kind of, you have tampering, but you have this kind of psychotic thing going on where they're constantly having to react as opposed to looking at the leading indicators that are out there, putting them on a chart, and then saying, oh, we got something going on here in our economy. So that's what I wanted to cover. Is this is why the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, shouldn't exist. And people freak out because we got to have somebody do something. And it's classic, I'll call it ignorance and leave it at that, because most people do not use these types of tools or this type of thinking. But it's the difference between moving and propelling ourselves forward, and you discover that you cannot control everything in a very large organization, definitely in government, and certainly in our economy. There are just so many components around you that can be messed with, and you turn the wrong one, which I believe the Fed has done. We're in a recession right now as of this recording, even though you had everybody come out. You had the Fed chair say, oh, no, we're not really in a recession. And then you had Janet Yellen come out, oh, we're not really in a recession. We're in a recession. And because they're reacting to being late to controlling inflation, things that they should have done after the great financial crisis. Let's go back that far. Because they didn't do it then, paying the price now, and their over control of basically raising interest rates is going to lead us into a depression. It's virtually guaranteed at this point. And, I see this in organizations. This is just multiplied on a much larger scale with something bigger in the economy. And it's all because the Federal Reserve was tampering with the economy with limited and wrong data and not understanding the difference between special and common causes of variation that I outlined. That's what I wanted to cover in this video. And remember, there is always a better way.